So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Hallie Perlich, and I am the technical manager for this session on collecting dietary data using a country-adapted 5-minute survey module chaired by Elise Talsma. Thank you for taking part in ANH 2021, and we are looking forward to a robust and interactive session today. So just a quick reminder that anything you may need to access the conference materials and program can be found on the ANH Academy website at anh-academy.org/ANH2021. Before Elise takes the conversation forward, I have a few small technical announcements to ensure our experience is as smooth and interactive as possible. So first, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the ANH Academy website following this conference. All participants have been muted, but please introduce yourselves using the chat function. Let us know your name, where you're joining us from, and the organization you work with. We encourage you to share your webcam video feed during this session, but if your connection is bad, then we recommend turning your video off. Later in the session, we will open up the conversation with a Q&A. If you have questions, we invite you to share them in the chat box throughout the session, and we'll do our best to raise them during the Q&A. Lastly, if at any point you experience technical issues, please check your audio settings and your internet connection. You can always try to reconnect to the session using the same Zoom link you used to be here today. If you have a technical question, please send me a direct message using the chat box. Thanks so much, and over to you, Elise.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this learning lab. And like Hallie said, please introduce yourself in the chat function. Tell us your name, where you work, and where you are based, as we would love to hear this. And it also makes it a bit easier to interact with you. Yeah. Well, this learning lab focuses on the Diet Quality Questionnaire, or the DQQ in short. Yes, you should be aware, DQQ, that word you will hear a lot in the next 2 hours. So DQQ is short for Diet Quality Questionnaire. Don't forget. My name is Elise Talsma, and I'm working at Wageningen University. I'm based in the Netherlands, and I'm facilitating this learning lab together with my colleagues. And I will introduce you to them shortly. There's Anna Hersford. She's from Harvard and Wageningen University, based in the USA. Please wave, Anna, then they know who you are. Then we have Chris Fogliano from USAD in the USA. Also, please say hello. Yeah. Then we have Inge Brouwer from Wageningen University, based in the Netherlands. And Laura Trijsburg, also from Wageningen University, but based in Malawi. Yeah, she also waves. Good. Okay. That being said, so what is the DQQ actually? Well, it's a monitoring tool for diet quality at the population level. And there already have been a few publications about it. It's suitable for characterizing dietary patterns and tracking trends, for example, over time. It's designed for implementation in large surveys, but it can also be used in research. And we will give you a few examples of this as well. Now, all the facilitators have been working with this DQQ in various ways. Yeah, and today we will make sure that you also know what this DQQ actually is, what it does, and how you can use it in your work. So it will be a hands-on experience where you yourself will work in small breakout groups to adjust the DQQ to your needs, and you will apply an example questionnaire based on the Pakistani context, I think, and you will also calculate some new scores with this. So you will learn all of that during this learning lab. That being said, first we would like to start with some questions. So we will have some polling questions for you. And therefore I hand over to my colleague Chris. He's in charge of all the polls. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Elise. And yeah, we're going to start off today with a little icebreaker to get things started. We're excited to have you, and I'm going to read a little introduction, and then there will be a set of 4 sets of polling questions, 10 in total. The questions will not appear as I read them because they are meant to be read aloud. So it will just read question 1, question 2, etc. And there will be 3 answers for each of the 10 questions. It'll be yes, no, or not sure. So we're going to be testing some of the DQQ questions today, which we're really excited about. So as I mentioned, I'm first going to read the introduction as if we were administering the DQQ, and then we'll go into the questions and I'll launch the polls. So now I'd like to ask you some yes or no questions about the food and drinks that you consumed yesterday during the day or the night, whether you had it at home or somewhere else. So first, I would like you to think about yesterday from the time you woke up all the way through the night. Think to yourself about the first thing you ate or drank after you woke up in the morning. Think about where you were and when you had any food or drink in the middle of the day. And think about where you were when you had an evening meal or any food or drink you had in the evening or in the late night. And any other snacks or drinks you may have had in between meals throughout the day or night. So I'm interested in whether you had the food items I will mention if they were combined with any other foods. So please listen to the foods or drinks as I name them. And if you ate any of them, say yes. So I'm going to read the next set of questions aloud, and we actually will not be able to identify who says yes or no to these questions. So it will be anonymous and not linked to your name. So the first set of questions, there are two questions related to the prompt I read just before. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. I'll read both of the questions, and once you have an answer for both of them, then you can submit that poll. So yesterday, did you have bread, rice, noodles, or pasta? That's question number 1. I'll read it one more time, then I'll move to question number 2. Yesterday, did you have bread, rice, noodles, or pasta? Okay, question number 2. Yesterday, did you have any sodas like Coke, Pepsi, Fanta, or Sprite? I see some polls coming in, great. I'll just read both of the questions one more time in case there's any audio issues. But the first question is, yesterday, did you have bread, rice, noodles, or pasta? The second one is, yesterday, did you have any sodas like Coke, Pepsi, Fanta, or Sprite? Great. I think we have a good amount of polls in. Is it okay, team, if I release these? Great. All right, so you can see here that a large majority of people, 70% that participated, had a starchy staple yesterday, assuming people were able to use the poll function successfully, and that only 9% or 2 had a sugar-sweetened beverage yesterday, like Coke, Pepsi, Fanta, or Sprite. So you can see that the first question captures staple foods, staple grains, starchy staples very well, and the second takes a pulse on sugar-sweetened beverages within a population such as the one today. So yeah, great, thank you. All right.
We're an unusual population today.
I know.
Nutrition-focused, conscious people about nutrition. So it's interesting.
Exactly.
Very low sugar-sweetened beverage consumption.
Great. Okay. The next set of questions, I'll launch this poll, and then I'll read them aloud. So yesterday, did you have any fruits that are dark yellow or orange inside, like ripe mango or ripe papaya? The second question, actually, before we even get that, if you said yes to this question, please prepare in the chat. Feel free to type in which fruit that you had that's dark yellow or orange inside, because we're curious which one that was. And then the question number 4 is, yesterday, did you have ripe mango, ripe papaya, apricots, or dried apricots? So I'll read those 2 questions again quickly. So the question number 3 is, yesterday, did you have any fruits that are dark yellow or orange inside, like ripe mango or ripe papaya? And if yes, write in the chat box which fruits you had. And question number 4 is, yesterday, did you have ripe mango, ripe papaya, apricots, or dried apricots? I still see some polls coming in, so I'll give it a few moments here. Nectarine, great, yeah, thanks for these, the chat items here. Great, so question 2, we had a 62% said no, and question 4, we had 81% say no. So the learning objective here is that open-ended questions, such as the first one, question 3, unintentionally capture items that should be excluded, such as oranges, or I even see tangerines, plums, other foods that may not actually be vitamin A rich. So that's why we prefer question number 2, which is more pointed and contextualized to the population. So yeah, no, thanks for participating. It's part of the learning process here. So okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to move to the third question. Let's see. All right, poll number 6. Okay, there are 4 sets of questions in this poll, so I'm going to launch it now and then go ahead and read these questions. So question number 5 is, yesterday, did you have any milk or milk products such as milk, sour milk, skim milk, yogurt, cheese, powdered milk, condensed milk, evaporated milk, goat milk, camel milk, but not including butter, ice cream, cream, or sour cream? Give you a second to digest that one. That's quite a long one. The 6th question is, yesterday, did you have cheese? The third one, or sorry, question number 7 is, yesterday, did you have yogurt or sour milk? And question number 8 is, yesterday, did you have milk or powdered milk? Great, see lots of results coming in. Now we're curious, if feel free to discuss in the chat and throw your comments in there, but which of the 4 questions that we asked was the easiest to answer or easier to answer? Would love to hear your thoughts there. Okay. Great, share the results here. Yes, so somebody said number 8 or cheese was the most easiest, and that really is the point. Long questions such as number 5 are difficult for respondents to absorb. There's so much going on and so many foods, it can get a bit confusing. And particularly with number 5, it ends the question with a negative. So the last bit was not including butter, ice cream, cream, or sour cream. So it's cognitively challenging to end a question with a negative, particularly when the list of foods is so long. So with the DQQ, we really are aiming to adapt the questions to be short, concise, and just very easy to respond to. And those were questions 6, 7, and 8, the more simple versions of the question. So yeah, great. Thank you for your feedback there. And then we have one more set of questions, then we will continue on with the rest of the show. Great.
Just to note on that last set, the last 3 questions, cheese, yogurt, or sour milk, and then milk or powdered milk, captured the exact same information as the first very long question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anna. Okay, great. So question number 9 is, yesterday, did you have any vegetables such as tomatoes, cabbage, eggplant, lettuce, cucumbers, or other vegetables? And if you said yes to this question, write in the chat box which vegetable that you had yesterday. And question number 10, and the final question, is, yesterday, did you have tomatoes, cabbage, eggplant, lettuce, cucumbers, mushrooms, or okra? And if you said no, was there a vegetable that you had that was not included in this question? And if so, please feel free to indicate that in the chat as well. Yes, I have a request to read number 10 again. I'll read both of them again. So number 9 was, yesterday, did you have any vegetables such as tomatoes, cabbage, eggplant, lettuce, cucumbers, or other vegetables? And number 10 was, yesterday, did you have tomatoes, cabbage, eggplant, lettuce, cucumbers, mushrooms, or okra? And if you said yes to the first question, please write which vegetable you had in the chat. If you said no, but you had another vegetable that was not included in this question, please write that in the chat as well. Great. Gourd, tomatoes. I see onions, carrot. Great, that's super helpful. I'll end the poll here so we can see the results. So the learning objective here is that open-ended questions, such as the first one that states "and other vegetables," may result in misclassifications, including foods like potatoes, onions, herbs, garlic. I even saw carrots in there, which technically is a vegetable, but it fits in the vitamin A rich category. And then some sentinel foods may remind people that they have eaten a food that they've forgotten, such as mushrooms. We added that to the second question. So these questions have to be adapted for each population at a country level to include relevant examples. So this short list of vegetables does not include many common vegetables in many countries, but this, I forget exactly where we extracted this one from. It may have been the United States DQQ. But yeah, I believe that's the last question. So for the sake of time, I'll pass it over to Anna. But yeah, thank you so much for participating in this cognitive testing, and hopefully this will continue to make sense as we explore more of the DQQ for the rest of this learning lab. Thanks so much. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Chris. That gives you just a flavor of some of the different ways that questions can be asked, and what you might think of or not think of when you hear a question asked in a certain way. And that whole process of figuring out what people are thinking about when they hear the way a question is read has been a big part of how the DQQ has been developed, and what we'll be practicing today in some of the breakout session. And mainly with this Learning Lab, we want to share with you how, when we're thinking about collecting dietary data, a lot of times we talk about the, the results and what the indicators mean and what we can get from the information, but also having to step back and, think about the way that the information is gathered, and trying to make the actual questions themselves as clear and low burden and consistently understood as we possibly can, so that we get the right data before being able to analyze what's going on with the data. I have a logistics question for the organizers. Should I be sharing my screen for the slides?
Yes, you are welcome to go ahead and do that. Let me know if you don't see the ability to do it, but you should have it.
Let me see. Sorry for probably should have practiced this before we started the session. There it is. Okay, so let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Anna.
Okay. So I'm going to give you an overview of the diet quality questionnaire, the way that it was developed, and kind of how it originated and what it's used for, before we go into some more depth on thinking through the way the questions are asked and how to arrive at the best, most easily understood way of asking each question. just to give some background context, the DQQ was developed as the kind of key methodological piece of the Global Diet Quality Project, which I lead from Harvard, and also in collaboration with all of our colleagues here at Wageningen and Chris, who was at Massey University and before shifting to his new position, and many other collaborators. And the whole project is a partnership between Gallup, Harvard, and GAIN. This project really was initiated to try to bridge the global data gap, to try to figure out, starting back in 2016, we sat down and tried to figure out how do we start to collect reliable, comparable, meaningful data across all countries on diet. Diet's really complex. How do we get something that's simple enough to be feasible, yet have enough information to be meaningful, and also have a tool that can be implemented in any situation. The goal of the overall project is to produce openly available and nationally representative gender disaggregated data on diet quality across all countries annually. And with that, to provide policymakers, researchers, and programmers with the data needed to understand diets. And also to enable sustained data collection by national governments and other organizations by providing country-adapted data collection tools. And that's the DQQ. Also, this arose really from having experience in trying to link agriculture and nutrition, and the difficulties that are faced by agricultural specialists, ag program managers who don't necessarily have a nutrition expert on the team, to be able to kind of democratize diet data collection so that it can be done by non-nutritionists. So the DQQ, the main tool of this approach here, it was developed in tandem with indicators to ensure that the tool itself was fit for purpose to gather the information we want, and also that to ensure that the indicators gathered are feasible and reliable to collect. The overall approach is a set of yes or no questions about foods and drinks consumed in the previous day or night. You heard Chris give the introduction, so now you have a very good idea of what that feels like to think through. And it includes 29 universal food groups that are, the food groups are the same everywhere, but the food items are country adapted to reflect the most commonly consumed foods in each place. The questions are read aloud the same way each time, either in person or by phone. They're read out loud, just like you heard. They're not something that the person looks at, and there's no visual cues or discussion about it. And so the whole thing takes about 5 minutes to administer and doesn't have any specialized training needs, doesn't have a need for a nutrition specialist to do probing like would happen in a full quantitative 24-hour recall. These are the list of food groups in the DQQ. You will see a lot more of these later in the session. The first column has a lot of the diverse plant foods, a lot which are familiar from the MDDW indicator, as well as the second column, which has the animal source foods, and then the third column, which has a lot of the kind of foods and drinks to limit in the diet that are sweet or salty or fried. And you can kind of see here that there's a lot of food groups that would capture the MDDW, but there's more than that. So we're not just interested in that as an indicator. We want to also be able to collect data that says something about risk factors for non-communicable disease associated with diets. So really the DQQ was designed to measure multiple facets of diet quality. First of all, the MDDW, or when it's generalized across the population to men and other age groups, as well as women of reproductive age, it's the food group diversity score. with the same 10 food groups. And then also those additional food groups beyond what's needed for the MDDW would capture risk factors for NCDs associated with global guidance from the World Health Organization. You can see here in this blue box, all of these pieces of guidance that are meant to apply everywhere in all contexts to protect health against NCDs. And we also wanted the DQQ to gather data relevant to nutrition transition trends and ultra-processed food intakes. So there are a number of questions that do come into play for the second function of risk factors for NCDs, but also are interesting on their own. How are trends, what's the population level of intake of sugar sweetened beverages, instant noodles, packaged salty snacks, other kinds of sweets or fast food. We saw in this population here, there's a low consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. How would that differ among a different set of the population or at a different time? And then in the future, we might also be able to use these food groups to look at some indicators of environmental impact. So it's designed with all that in mind. I just want to go into a little detail on the Global Dietary Recommendations Score, which is a new indicator which is related to this risk factors for NCDs point here, because we'll be calculating it in this session today. So I want to make sure you understand its purpose. We already had the MDDW indicator to work with, so we didn't need to develop new indicators of nutrient adequacy, but there wasn't anything, similar that could be done from food groups about NCDs. So this is what we developed. The Global Dietary Recommendations Score, true to its name, reflects these set of 11 global dietary recommendations. It has two components. The first one in the green box is the GDR Healthy Score, which reflects the first 5 recommendations of things to consume more of in the diet. And the second component, the GDR Limit Score, reflects the second 6, or the second set of 6 recommendations, which are things to limit in the diet, which are, positively associated with increased risk of NCDs. And then the red and the green, they're combined. They're just the red subtracted from the green to get the overall GDR score. And when we look into the food groups that are associated with these scores, you can see here that the ones in the green here, the consumption of those food groups correlates positively with meeting the global dietary recommendations for health protective foods. And consumption of these in the yellow here correlates negatively with meeting the global dietary recommendations. So we're really, these food groups appear as important for looking at risk factors of NCDs. Not all the food groups are here because, again, some of them are for other purposes, like calculating the MDDW. So altogether, we have all the food groups needed for each kind of indicator. I also wanted to point out that, so the GDR score, a higher score is better, where it's the higher the score, the more recommendations would be likely to be met. And that it's also correlated with percent of energy from ultra-processed foods. So the higher the GDR score, the less energy from ultra-processed foods is consumed. And we know that that's associated with various negative aspects of the diet. Carlos Montero has been a collaborator on this project and done lots and lots of research showing the percent of energy from ultra-processed foods itself is a pretty good indicator. So we can approximate that with the GDR score to look at overall diet quality. And okay, so just for your information, we have some next steps. We've done an initial validation of this score. We are intending to verify the validation in additional diverse countries, gathering global data sets right now globally of countries that we can use for this validation, and looking at some additional indicators that you can see in bold here. We won't be calculating these today, but just to let you know that they're beyond these 2 main indicators that we're talking about here, the GDR score and the MDDW. There are additional indicators that can come from this diverse set of foods that are collected in the DQQ. and probably some that we haven't even thought of yet. We're also looking to validate a combined score where we put the GDR score and the MTDW together to find an indicator of a diet pattern that meets both nutrient needs and protects health. So that's coming in the future. So to talk a little bit more about the tool development and what we'll practice today, as background here, whenever we're interested in valid and feasible measurement of anything, but something like diet, we want to think about, first of all, the validity of the indicator, like what I was just discussing. If we have the best, most complete data, what does the indicator reflect and is it valid? But then go to the tool and say, okay, is the data collection tool valid? Does it result in accurate and reliable information? And to get here, cognitive validity is really essential, requiring, thoughtfulness into survey design and even anthropology and how foods are called and the way people think about them. And then thirdly, for valid feasible measurement, we have to think about feasibility. Can the people who want to implement the tool actually do it with the skills that they have? So like I said, this was fundamental to the design of the DQQ, that even people in agriculture with no nutrition expertise can produce the same result as a nutrition expert with this tool. This I'll kind of skip over, but just wanted to flag that the Wageningen group has led this study of validating the DQQ in 3 countries. One of them was part of Chris's dissertation, and we've gotten quite good results here, showing that basically the DQQ gives very similar information as a complete quantitative 24-hour recall when we're looking at the population level of intake of different food groups. So in that sense, we have tested validity. But then there's another kind of validity we're talking about more today, which is tested through cognitive testing. So doing interviews and asking people different ways, just like we did in the beginning of this session. If we test different ways of asking the question, how are people thinking about it and how are they answering the questions? We found in a lot of examples when we did this in Brazil and immigrant communities in the US speaking different languages, basically finding that probably is kind of obvious when you think about it, but that people just group foods differently. So we might, as researchers, think, oh yeah, we're clear on what we mean by dark orange fruits. That means rich in vitamin A. But other people might hear that and think of tangerines and oranges, or even plums, or something that the color might be thought of differently by different kinds of people with different backgrounds. And the other thing is that people have different abilities to think of other items that belong. So if we say, did you eat this food or another one like it, some people will think of other foods like it, but other people will not be able to think of anything, like our friend Cookie Monster, who can only think of cookies, cannot think of any other kinds of sweets that might belong together in that category. So we can't assume that everyone has the same ability to kind of think like a nutritionist. So bottom line, we found that the more strenuous the estimation or food knowledge is required, the more systematic bias to expect. And that's why we've settled on the method of asking specific sentinel food items, so everyone hears the same items and doesn't have to think of different items in their head, where we might get different results from different populations. So to get those sentinel food examples, we need some really careful work on the back end to do adaptation for each country to identify the food examples that are most commonly consumed. We do this through key informant interviews of sometimes 3 if it's a country we know really well, but mostly more like 10 experts, sometimes even more, in food culture and nutrition. In each country, we've had a lot of help from different organizations identifying these people, and in partnering with different end user stakeholders in different countries. And the purpose of these interviews is to identify country-specific food examples to use in the list-based questions, or these sentinel foods. and to identify as well common names for foods so that the questions can be understood by everyone. When we do the exercise later in this session with the Pakistan adapted questionnaire, you'll probably run into some questions where you don't know what the item means if you're not from Pakistan. And that's because we're adapting the question to be understood by the people in that specific country who would be familiar with all of the food items. So every time we do a country adaptation, we really have embedded cognitive testing in those interviews. We're always asking, can you as a respondent actually answer the questions I'm asking, and does your understanding match my intention of what I'm asking? We did find some surprises in a lot of the country adaptations where, we were surprised that we would think that we're asking something, but it's understood in a different way in that different context. So like in several West African countries, we found that the word juice is the word for soda. So we have to be careful if we want to ask about fruit juice and use a different terminology than just saying the word juice. Similarly, words like that as an American, what I think of as cucumber is different than what someone in Gabon will think of as cucumber, where it means squash seeds. And so we found a lot of examples of these where the word itself means different things in different places. Just want to give a shout out to the wonderful adaptation team who has been doing these interviews and kind of zooming around the world. Chris is here, has been here, doing this from the start. Everybody on this team has been just doing a tremendous job digging into the kind of cultural anthropology of food in each country and producing DQQs for about 100 countries. So we're nearing the finish line. They should be available towards September, October this year, if we can get them out and all goes well, so that they'll be publicly available and downloadable as a tool for anyone to use. Wanted to mention that in a lot of these countries, Gallup World Poll is also collecting data, so that as of next year, we'll have data collected using the DQQ in all of these countries in green. So on to our activity. I want to begin to introduce, things to think about. We're going to have an adaptation activity in groups. And when you're doing this, thinking about, for the food groups that you'll be considering, thinking about all of these kinds of considerations. So what are the most commonly consumed foods for the country that you're adapting the questionnaire for? We want to aim to capture most people who eat anything in the food group. Think of in the range of, about 90, 95%, but not 100%. We don't want everything. We don't want an exhaustive question. We found, like, for an example, in the US, if we want to find out about white roots and tubers, we only have to ask one food, which is potatoes, and we get 99% of people who consume that food group. So think about what the majority of people would be eating. And then think about, how is the food eaten? We don't want to ask about, like, flour when we're asking about starchy staples, because people don't eat flour. We want to ask about bread or pasta instead. Think about how the food is called by most people. In Kenya, if you said kale, people don't use that word. They use the word sukuma wiki, even as an English speaker. So think about what the name is in the context. Think about, does everyone understand that name, or are other names required? So, like, for example, in Nepal, there's different dialects in different regions where the word for eggplant, there's 3 different words that we probably have to use all of them, because in some regions, people would only use one of those words. And then think through, if you're using a food word, does it mean anything else? So we found, for example, in Nigeria, wara or awara as, a term that could be in 2 different categories, meaning either soy cheese or dairy cheese. So then we have to specify exactly what we mean by that term, so it doesn't result in confusion. And finally, if you're thinking of a food word, does it include anything it shouldn't? So, like, if we said citrus, in Indonesia, there's a very common term that means that, but it includes a lot of citrus we don't want to include. So it includes, like, limes or lemons and things used as condiments, eaten in small quantities. So we had to find a way to really get at the words that only capture what we want and not what we don't. So these are things to think about. And I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Let me stop sharing, who will introduce the activity.
Yes, thank you, Anna. That was a nice introduction into the DQQ and a lot of work that you've been doing. I will start sharing my screen for the session. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So we go into the first breakout session, and that's about selecting of the sentinel foods. Chris read aloud some of the questions, and normally first the food group is mentioned, and then the sentinel foods which belong to this food group, which is very context specific. So as Anna was explaining very nicely. So yeah, we will have breakout groups of 4 people. And first, choose the country. And it's easiest to choose one of the countries a group member comes from. So you know what kind of foods are consumed. And then for this country, make a selection of sentinel foods for the following 2 food groups: dark green leafy vegetables and processed. And from cognitive testing, it came forward that you shouldn't include more than 7 sentinel foods in one question. But in some instances, for some countries, dark green leafy vegetables or other vegetables are consumed. There are more sentinel foods than these 7 sentinel foods. So you can actually have 2 questions relating to this. So you have 1A asking about the dark green leafy vegetables, and 1B question naming the other sentinel foods. So that's also a possibility when you're developing these sentinel food lists. So I think Haley, you will divide everybody on the breakout session groups, and we have 15 minutes. Is it 15 minutes? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, we will do 10 minutes. It will be a short 10 minutes because we're running a little bit behind time.
Okay, we have 10 minutes. So think very carefully about the country and the sentinel foods.
Yeah. And we will visit you in the breakout room, so you're not
exactly.
alone.
Yes, you can ask questions. Yes.
Exactly.
Let's take a step back and let's reflect on what has happened so far. I would like to start with some experiences of some groups. So I would like to call upon some groups and one person from that group to share with us, what they experienced in composing the sentinel foods for the different for the 2 food groups. So let me start with group number 1. And maybe I was lucky to be part of group number 1. And I can ask Bridget maybe to come up and share your video and tell us some of the experiences we went through in making a list for Turkey.
Yeah, it was quite complicated, I think, partly because having an idea of dark green leafy vegetables and then thinking how to translate from Turkish into English. And it was, we came up with 3 in the end. And I think, it was just, I think it's quite difficult over Zoom, maybe. I think if you're in country, then it's easier. You can sort of have a little bit more hands-on experience. But yeah, it did take us most of the time to talk about the dark green leafy vegetables. And we came up with the dark cabbage, some other green leaves and parsley, I think, unless I missed any, Inga, I'm not sure.
No, I think that's what we did, but we really encountered language problems, right, to translate from Turkish, and we encountered that the other members did not know anything. about food that was consumed in Turkey. So we also could not ask or probe, you know, the proper questions to get out more of the knowledge of our Turkish group member. I think that's what was happening. So thanks, Bridget. So can I go to group number 2 to share with us some of the experiences that you had?
And before we go to group 2, could I just make a quick comment on the parsley example that came up from Turkey? Because I think it's a really good example where in the same vegetable doesn't necessarily count in the same group in different places. So in a lot of countries, parsley is just used as an herb or a, you know, garnish. And so we would not include it because people might have had it on their plate and not had really a vegetable. But in other countries, it's something that's consumed as a whole salad in very big quantities. And so it's interesting that, you know, in Turkey, parsley might come up as a valid vegetable, whereas in the US, we would not count parsley as a vegetable because it's not usually eaten like that.
Yes, thanks, Anna. That's a really valuable addition to this discussion. So could I go to group number 2? Is there somebody who would like to pop up and tell us and share us your experience?
Yeah, we had selected India, and so we had, it was very easy, the question, because there's a word in most Indian languages that means leafy vegetables, so it's super easy. But the problem was with the second question of processed meats and what those actually meant and how processed they had to be processed meats, because the only thing that I could think of was things like fish, like processed dried fish, but that's fish and not meat, but it has the salt level and the other parts that you think of when you think of like a processed meat. And then other people brought up things that are just like slightly processed or are processed a lot but are processed at home, like hamburgers that you would eat in an outside store. But we didn't know what to count for that. And because some parts of India are also vegetarian, I mean, it was just very complicated. So we did not get that part unclear about the definition of processed meat. So we wanted to follow up on that.
Okay, Gillian, good to see you in this meeting. So you didn't experience the language problem, and there were probably more people who knew about India or foods that were consumed in India. So that was a different experience. And you said mostly it was difficult to know whether this particular food belongs to this food group or not. So that were the discussions you had. Yeah, thanks a lot. And maybe one more group. The other groups will come up later. Maybe we can go to group number 5.
And one more comment I'd like to chime in about the processed meats. That's exactly what we hoped you would struggle with, because with this particular category, there is a specific definition that we use, which is the World Health Organization and the International Agency on Research on Cancer definition of processed meats. Which refers to red meats, which are, there's a couple poultry, but anything that's cured, salted, basically something that has nitrates. So things like chicken nuggets or fish fingers actually don't meet the definition, even though they may be ultra processed. So it is a different, it's a very specific definition, and exactly what you found is a struggle in a lot of places to say, you know, which one is truly meeting that definition and which one is just something that's home processed or ultra processed. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. So let's go to group number 5. Is there anybody who wants to pop up to share with us your experiences?
I can speak for our group if you like. So we were focused on South Africa to start with, and then we queried whereabouts in South Africa. Are we urban? Are we rural? Are we home producers? Are we people who purchase from markets? And then we started actually widening and became Southern Africa and looked at dark green leafy vegetables from other countries like Malawi and places as well as South Africa, and some overlap there. And had the Portuguese kale, the Swiss chard, amaranthus, pumpkin leaves, blackjack, chisoso, pak choy, and then some indigenous leafy vegetables that we don't even know the English for, and things like sweet potato leaves, cowpea leaves, mustard and Peru and stuff. And so we had quite a lot there. And then for processed meats, we didn't have very many. We just got ham, biltong or jackie, and sausages maybe, but we didn't have very long to discuss. I don't know, Mike Panchali, anything you want to add?
No, I haven't really got anything to add apart from the fact that, again, it's the definition of processed meats. You know, it's as we were saying earlier on. Yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot. So you indicated, Tanya, that you had a lot of green leafy vegetables, and actually you were asked to list about 7. Did you do any attempt to reduce it, to reduce the numbers?
No, because we had slightly different geographies where some of them were popular because we kind of weren't sure what our geographical boundaries were once we started talking. So we've got the ones that are the most common, which we think will be across them, but it will differ depending which areas of the country, which types of parts of the population we're interviewing with. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's also nice that you hint on that there are different areas with different foods that are consumed. And so it's also needed to differentiate between these areas in which foods you will come up. Anna, I don't know whether you want to chip in here as well.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, having those different insights from different regions and different agroecological zones. Often some countries are very diverse. Just to say that we would want to include all of the foods that are common in each of the different regions. So it is, you know, definitely good that your group was talking about those different areas, and maybe this can lead into the next group, which I was a part of, and I'm sure they'll say more, but we were talking about, you know, having different dark green leafy vegetables that are common in different seasons, as well as in different regions, and that we would like to include all of those. So, you know, as you saw in the slide from Laura, if there's more examples than 7, which the dark green leaves are very diverse, that we would have you know, more than 7 could flow into a second question to accommodate all those different leaves that would be important if you happen to ask the questionnaire in a certain place in the country or in a certain season of the year.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. This also addresses one of the questions of Tanya, I think, is how is seasonality of different points in the year included in the DQQ? Is it using the DQQ in different parts of the year, or something else?
Yeah, we don't have different seasons. This are different questionnaires for different seasons, just trying to include any item that is very common in any season. Yeah, so like, you know, the question that we had in the beginning on the dark orange fruits would have mangoes, even though mangoes are probably not in most places common in the entire year. They're usually a seasonal fruit, but they're an important one when they are in season. So anything that's important at any time, we would put into the question.
Great, thanks, Anna. I think now we should shift to the next session. You had some hands-on experience on developing, you know, the kinds of foods to be asked for in this, well, in 2 of the 29 food groups. So let's now assume that that we have a DQQ already developed, and now go to the step to calculate the different indicators from it. So I would like to invite Elise and Laura to come up and to introduce the next group work.
Yes, I will first start explaining you a little bit how it works, how to administer the DQQ. So what Inge says is true. You already finished. You have the Sentinel foods ready of the DQQ. You're ready to go. But then what should you do? Well, it's very important that before you start, you train your supervisors, your enumerators, and you do a pilot study, right? And you can try out all the aspects and everything that can go wrong with doing a survey. Good, you should have a clear role for all these people that are involved. Yeah, and then it's important to stress that you should not improvise, and you should also not use your own explanations of the food items or of the food groups. Stick to the questionnaire. That should be your guidance to the supervisors and the enumerators. Yeah, another thing that's important, you should have your papers or your tablet and your charger and everything ready. So we did this with a tablet, very easy to administer, using Kobo as to download all the answers to, etc. And you should have your list of participants ready, and don't forget the consent forms, because they should sign a consent form before you start. Now, then when doing the interview, and hopefully I can't see it, but in the chat, a DQQ is shared from Pakistan. So if you all open that document, you actually see a ready-to-use DQQ. So when you're doing the interview, you start with the first introduction phrases. So you read it out loud. Think back to Chris, who started with this at the beginning. He read those sentences that you had to think back. Now, what is very important that you read this loud and clearly, you go slowly, and sometimes you have to be silent. And Chris actually didn't do it that well, but because we are stressed for time in this session. But sometimes there are dots in the questionnaire or the asterisks, and then you should be silent for a few seconds, so you let the person think. Yeah, that's very important. So do not rush. Give the respondent time to think and to think about the answers and also understand the questions completely. You should read out all the food items, and you don't read the food groups. So you don't say dark green leafy vegetables, but you say all of those food items that are in there. Yeah. And even if the respondent already said yes, yes, you should still read everything and stick to the sentences. Now, and then you report yes or no for every question before you move on to the next one. And that's basically how you do it. It's very easy. It goes within 5 minutes. Even by phone, it goes really well. Yeah, and then you've done it. So then you have one questionnaire ready. And then? What do we do? So then you can make some calculations. And that's what Laura will tell you more about. I will stop sharing, and then Laura can share her screen.
I will start sharing. So, yes. I hope everybody can see my screen now. So then, for all these 29 DQQ food groups, you have your answers recorded. Well, I
think we lost Laura.
Okay. Yes. Can you still hear me?
Now it's
yes, you're back now.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Sorry, my internet is sometimes interrupted. So you have basically a data set which looks like this. So for each ID number, you have for your DQQ question a 1 if the person recorded yes, or a 0 if the person recorded no. And in this example data set, you see DQQ11 and DQQ12, which is actually an example of where one question is asked in 2 different questions. So in 1A and 1B, because there are more than 7 sentinel foods for this food group. So, well, you have your data set. And what can you do with it? Because it's nice, this metric, these results, but you want to make sense and say something about the healthiness of your diet. And that's where the indicators come in. And Anna already briefly mentioned it in her presentation. You can, for now, and who knows, there will be many more, but for now, we know that you can calculate 2 indicators, the minimum dietary diversity score for women, and the GDR score, the Global Dietary Recommendation Score. And the GDR score, it's actually having the GDR total and the GDR healthy and the GDR limit. And I will explain a bit more which food groups are part of this. And well, hopefully in future, there will be many more of these indicators telling us something about the healthiness of the diet. So let's go to the minimum dietary diversity score for women. You see here all 10 MDDW food groups, so grains, white roots and tubers, etc., up till total fruits. And in the second column, you see the DQQ question number, which corresponds to this food group. So if you go to the grains, white roots and tubers and plantains MDDW food group, you see that the DQQ question numbers asking information about this MDDW food group are 1, 2, and 3. So how you calculate the score is if you score 1 on either one of these DQQ questions, or maybe on question 1 and 2 you score yes, or on question 1 and 3 you score yes, your MDDW score for this food group will be 1. So you score either 1 or yes on all these 3 questions, or on the 2 questions you score yes, or on the 3 questions you score yes. So you need to do a bit of summarizing of your results for the grains, but also for dairy and the meat and poultry and fish food group. And you see an asterisk for the dark green leafy vegetables food group, which basically means that for some countries, this question is separated into 2 questions simply because there are a lot of sentinel foods to be mentioned. So you need to also summarize that one. And the total for MDDW is a range from 0 till 10. So then we go to the GDR healthy components. You see here all 9 healthy components. Well, it's an easy one because each healthy component corresponds to just 1 question. Although, again, here for dark green leafy vegetables and for other vegetables, you see the asterisk behind the DQQ question number, which basically means that it can be split out into different questions, given that there are more sentinel foods in this food group. Again, here, you score all food groups, 1 if you consumed it, and 0 if you didn't consume it. And the GDR health score ranges from 0 till 9, because there are 0 food groups. Then there is the GDR limits. The same idea. If you consumed it, you get a point. If you didn't consume it, you get 0 points. There's one thing to note here, that processed meats is, if you consume it, you score 2, simply because there is such a strong correlation with the unhealthiness of your diet that the weighing factor for this food group or this component, processed meat, is higher than for the other components in the score. So if you consumed it, you get a 2. If you didn't consume it, you get a 0. So you can't score 1. And for unprocessed red meat, you see that there are, again, 2 DQQ questions dealing with it. And the same is holds for fast foods and instant noodles. Then we also have the GDR total score, which is calculated by extracting the GDR limit from the GDR healthy and adding 9 to this total score, which actually allows for a positive scoring, because if you would not add this 9 to it, you would get a range between -9 and 9. But for ease of how do you say it? For ease of explaining, we prefer it to be a positive scoring. So that's why the indicator for the GDR total, you can score between 0 and 80. Good to note is that a higher score reflects a healthier diet, or achieving more of the global dietary recommendations. Now, having said this, we are going into breakout groups again. And I don't know whether it's already shared in the chat, but there is an Excel file.
Yes, it's shared.
It's shared.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So there are 4 people in your breakout session, and we want to ask one person to read out this DQQ from Pakistan, which was also shared in the chat, to read the questions aloud, out loud, while the other 3 people fill in this Excel file for themselves, indicating whether they consumed a certain food group or not. And this Excel file already has built in the calculation of these 4 scores. So we want to ask you to do that. You have 20 minutes to do this.
Yeah, maybe 15, because we're running behind.
15. Okay,
Yeah, 15 minutes. That should be okay. So indeed, open the DQQ Pakistan DQQ. Open that one. Do that in your group work. Use the Excel sheet to fill it in. And then we see each other here again, and we will talk about how it went and what the results are.
Read into it too much as an indicator of your own diet quality yourself. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that while the MDDW has a cutoff of 5 or more, meaning a likelihood of having adequate micronutrients for women of reproductive age, it doesn't have a cutoff for other age groups. And then the GDR score, so far, there's no particular score that's like good or poor. It is more relative. So we could look at, it's hard to look at in isolation, but if we had, you know, a range of populations or a range of countries, we'd be able to say, these ones are in the top tertile, highest quality diets. These are in the lowest tertile, lowest quality diets. But as a single score in isolation, it's a little harder to interpret just on its own. So we could talk more about that after we look at the group scores.
All right, Anna, thanks. Let's go back to the poll then, Chris.
Yes, I have shared the poll.
Yeah.
So it should be able to, I see some responses coming in already, so.
Yeah, so the first question is about the MDDW. So it's in column J, right? Or G, what do you say? I always make a mistake between the two letters. So bring in your total score. I see only 7 people entering the score, and must be more. Yeah. Okay, I think that gives a nice overview. So most of us are in score 7. Some of us, 2 of them are in score 4, and there's 1 person in score 9. If this would be a result in a population, if we would be a large population, for example, as Anna said, 15% of our population, or actually we should say it the other way around, 85% would have a low risk of having a low micronutrient intake. I think that's the conclusion. What would be said from this result if it was at population level? And be careful, you know, it's not for your individual, because it's only 1 day. It's from a Pakistani interview, which is not for most of you, not your country. So foods you have not consumed probably that were in the list. So don't take it too serious for your own consumption, I would say. Then the next question is on the GDR healthy score. This is also 9-point score, right? So you could fill in your score as it is, and there's much larger variation than in the total MDDW score. And maybe Anna, you can come in how you would explain that there is a larger variation.
Yeah, that's totally expected for this kind of population, where for the MDDW or the food group diversity score, everyone here has a computer, has internet, is highly educated. We would assume that most people in this group are not at risk of micronutrient inadequacy and do have diverse diets. But on the other hand, for dietary factors, risk factors for NCDs, we are the kind of population that is at risk for, you know, having a lot of those in our diet, not having enough of the healthy items and possibly having too much of the unhealthy items, especially on a holiday. In like yesterday for the Father's Day conversation in the chat. So we would expect that in this population, you'd have a range of, you know, a lot of really health conscious people who've had like 8 is a, you know, really high score of having almost all of the health promoting items, but the whole range of, a possible day for, whether you've consumed a lot of these health promoting foods yesterday or not.
Yeah, thanks. So let's go to the GDR limit score then, which also gives quite some variation. So there are some people who had known. I know in our group there was a person who was eating vegan, which was also a funny exercise though, her saying no on all the questions concerning meat. And so we are wondering what you do in that case, if you have a particular, if you know that somebody is eating a particular, let's say diet, if it's a vegan diet and you know a lot of questions are coming in on meats and, dairy products, you still ask them. It becomes a bit awkward, I would say, during the interview. I don't know, Anna, whether you had experience of that before.
Yeah, the guidance is the same everywhere. Just read the questions. If you're vegan and you didn't have any meat, you just say no to all of the animal source food questions. It is a little awkward maybe, but it doesn't last too many minutes. So not too painful, hopefully. I can share that there's one country in the world where we put skip questions, which is in India, where we received the feedback from Gallup as a survey organization with a lot of experience culturally, that some people may become very offended to be asked questions about consuming meat. So there's a skip question to ask if someone, I think it's the religion and if they're pure vegetarian, so that those questions wouldn't be asked. But in most cases, in every country, there's some people who are vegan and they just would have to suffer through those couple minutes of questions.
Yes. All right. So then we go to the GDR total score. So we couldn't add all the score separately because of limitations in the Zoom poll. So what we see here, and then I think again, looking at if this would be a larger population, then we would say most of us, 40% is between 12 and 13. And there are very few who have between 4 and 5. And there are also few who have between 16 and 18. So there's nobody who has the maximum. There's also nobody who has the minimum in the global score. Now, concerning this, Anna, maybe that's a question to you again. For the MDDW, we know that we can use the cutoff point of 5, but then for the particular female population, of adult female population, could you reflect on these scores, what they would mean?
Yeah, and again, this is where I think we need a little bit more global evidence to see. We've never had a global survey that looks at current consumption. So when we start to get results next year, we can look at the range of these scores across countries to see, in nationally representative samples across many countries, what are the top scores and what are the bottom scores. I am not at all surprised that no one had the very top scores. That's very, very hard to achieve. In fact, when we did an analysis of about 45,000 people in Brazil and the US in secondary data sets, there was one person across all of those people who had every single recommendation met. Very unusual. So just based on that experience and the validation, I can say these scores are on the high end, which I guess is expected for this population. The cutoff, we did test a cutoff of the score of 10 for the GDR score, where above that score, you are more likely to have met at least half of the global dietary recommendations. Now, half doesn't particularly mean anything per se. It's just sort of a benchmark in your mind. If you think about those 11 recommendations and you have a score of more than 10, then chances are you've probably met at least half of them. So doing pretty well.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So let's round this off. We had some experience now with the DQQ, a bit experience on how to develop them, to think about and list different sentinel foods in the 29 food groups. And after that, we interviewed each other with the questionnaire of Pakistan, and then based on the questionnaire, using the data and the food groups that were consumed to arrive at different indicators of dietary diversity and dietary quality, including the MDDW, and then the GDR, and then both the healthy, the unhealthy parts, or the limit part and the total. So it would be nice now to go to a discussion and to hear your questions. Some very interesting questions are already coming up in the chat. So some of the questions are already answered. So please follow the chat. I will not repeat these questions again. So there's a question of Hazel. Hazel Malapit is on the country adaptation. And then especially on how you could deal with the regional variations in the sentinel foods. And this is a question for Anna to answer.
The regional variations, yeah, this is where for a given country, we would want to include any sentinel foods for any region. So there may be, asking the questionnaire in some regions, there may be some foods in the question which are not really relevant to those regions, but they're relevant to a different region in the country. So we saw this a lot in India, where there are some much more commonly consumed foods in the south versus the north. We just have one questionnaire because there's no clear cutoff of what would be the appropriate geography for a South India questionnaire or a North India questionnaire, because it's a gradation. But just knowing that in some regions, some items are more relevant than others, they're all included in the question if they're relevant anywhere in the country.
Yes, that's great, thanks. So there are also a few questions on quantities. Do we include quantities? You have answered the question of Tanya already in the chat, but there was another question coming up in the chat on that. So we are not asking questions in this questionnaire. I'm afraid, Anna, that you have to answer it again.
We do not ask quantities. So this questionnaire really builds on the foundational work done to develop the MDDW and show that by just simply asking about food groups, you can get a lot of information about the quality of the diet, because asking about quantities becomes a whole nother process. It becomes, you may need visual aids. People may not interpret it in the same way. You may need a nutrition expert to be able to do the enumeration, to probe for correct quantities. And so we wanted to avoid all those things to be able to have just a simple monitoring tool. Now, will the DQQ answer every question you have about diets? No. If you want to know detailed quantities, you need to use other methods apart from the DQQ. But if you want to have just a monitoring tool to have a quick pulse on the diet quality in a population, or the dietary trends and how they're changing in a population, then you can use this tool. So we specifically avoided quantities to make the tool feasible and easy for anyone to administer.
Right. And there's another interesting question of Tanya on whether you have answered truthfully to the questionnaire. Maybe Tanya, you can pop up and ask the question yourself in the screen. Would be nice to see you also in this discussion. Hi.
I'm just thinking that often in surveys, when it's personal information, I think it's a human thing to think through what the point of the question is, and to perhaps think about shaping one's answer in response to that. So I just wondered whether it's a difficult thing to test, and it goes for any method and any type of survey. But I just, was thinking about that particularly. I know dietary recall is it's a big problem. And the same with food waste recall. People like to try and put a more positive spin on the reality sometimes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I could say a brief word on that. That, like you said, it's kind of an impossible thing to get away from when you ask any kind of recall, that there might be a chance of social desirability bias. But we do think that asking about a specific day, yesterday, and asking about specific food items will minimize that as compared to asking, did you eat any salty packaged snacks? Did you eat any sugar sweetened beverages? You know, if we say the whole food group, people might think, oh, that's something I'm not supposed to eat. Whereas, did I eat, you know, chips or Nimco? Oh, that's a specific item. So we think that these ways of asking the questions might minimize that bias. There could be a lot of research on that, and, you know, dietary assessment's always a tricky thing.
Yeah, and this is also, so it's very important how you phrase it, and how you set the person at ease when you're doing the interview, and it's the whole setting. Indeed, I think that will help. Yeah.
Yeah, and another question was for Denise. She was in group number 1. I know her a bit better now. She's from Turkey. So she's asking, is there any age limitation for the DQQ or the GDR scores? I think that's a very good question, Denise. And I have to go back to Anna probably again, who has developed this DQQ.
Yeah, the DQQ really could be asked to anyone. I mean, there are issues in general about dietary recall for children, no matter what tool you use, whether children can actually report well what they ate. But, you know, if any kind of recall is valid, then I would say that the DQQ is as well. The indicators, though, have been validated for people over age 15. In the data sets that we're analyzing, that's the population we've used. So the indicators are, yeah, about, you know, amounts of food that would be consumed essentially by an adult.
Yeah. So there's another interesting question of Anne-Marie, which has relation to validity of the indicators that are developed with the DQQ compared to other dietary intake methods. So she is asking, is there any comment on using the methods combined with a food diary, for example, or what do we know about if you use a quantitative 24-hour recall compared to the DQQ in calculating the MDDW? And I think to that last question, maybe Laura, you can come in and reflect on the findings of the study done in Ethiopia and Vietnam. I hope you're still with us, Laura.
Sorry, my connection was breaking up a couple of times. So could you repeat the question?
The question is about how does the MDDW compare when you use a 24-hour recall or a DQQ, for example?
We did this in 3 countries, and in Solomon Islands, Ethiopia, and Vietnam, so quite diverse countries also, I would say. And when doing the comparison, I didn't see notable differences. Of course, there are in percentage some differences that you observe, which, yeah, I would expect, but they didn't differ notably. It's good to notice that I did analysis both with a 15 grams cutoff point, which is advised by the MDDW researchers, and without this 15 grams cutoff point. And even if I didn't use this 15 grams cutoff point, differences were not that major or notable. So I would say, yeah, as a conclusion, the DQQ in itself is performing quite well in assessing this, the MDDW, which is 5 points cutoff point compared to the 24-hour recall.
Hey, thanks, Laura. I think time has come I will give the word back to Elise to round up and start another ending poll. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you all very much for participating. I think we can talk for a few more hours about this, and there's yeah, and I'm sure in the future more will come. I hope by now you know at least a little bit what the DQQ is. We have a few polling questions as end questions. I'm not so sure anymore. Chris, were you going to do them, or they were here? So please look at these questions. Yeah, and I'm sorry that we didn't have time to answer all the questions that I see in the chat. They're all interesting, and we take them into account in our work. And thank you so much for being here and for participating. Chris, did we have one last question that we want them to put in the chat or not?
Yes, we have one more kind of open-ended question you're able to respond to.
Yeah, so the overall question is, did you find this learning lab helpful? So please put a few words on that in the chat, and then thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to the facilitators for a great session. If you have answered our quick polls and responded to the question that Chris dropped in the chat box, thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you on additional learning labs and research conference sessions next week.